This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin. Joining me this week, two turkeys spared by presidents past who now seek revenge on the American government. Special guest, Gabe Cheng.
I love being called a turkey. At least as long as I'm not a jive turkey.
We do what we can. And Paul Jasley is also here.
Hello, humanoids.
We are here today to talk about comic books because that's what we always do. This is episode 308. Gabe, thank you so much for coming back to the show. Before we get into things, I just want to say welcome to our special guest who's here today.
Oh yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. Been on the show a couple of times, and it's always good fun. So thank you for having me back.
Of course. Well, let's just dive right into things, folks. If you haven't heard, you should go back and listen to our other episodes where we had Gabe on the show. He's fantastic. He writes some amazing comic books. But today we're here to talk about comic books. I've got these two legally mandated questions that I have to ask, and they are: how have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Gabe.
Oh, I'm doing good. Thanksgiving was good. Did some traveling before that. And just in general, how comic books have been, it's been good. I'm noticing that a couple more indie comics, small comic publishers are getting involved in Hoopla, which is mainly where I read comics and trade paperbacks and stuff. So I've been picking up a couple of cool things on there. I have some friends in the indie comics community out here in Southern California. One of whom I will mention later in the show, but another one that I will mention now is Fanbase Press. Barbara and Brian Dillon are good friends of mine, and I finally was able to read some of their back catalog, including their I think it's one of their most recent, Nuclear Power, which I highly recommend. It's a very good book. They're the editors on it. I don't know the names of the creative team, but yeah, the comics have been going great, and I'm fulfilling my For Molly Kickstarter in a couple of weeks, hopefully next week actually.
Awesome.
And hopefully going to be launching my next comic Kickstarter in February of next year. So yeah.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. I mean, I'm glad to hear that you're able to get For Molly out there, given all the supply chain issues and stuff like that. I mean, that's super fortunate. Not to completely tangent here, but that's awesome to hear for all the people that supported that book.
Yeah, I'm really glad. I have a printer that, it's a relatively small printing. It's not like 1,000 units. But I have a printer that's in the United States that doesn't seem to be super delayed because of the supply chain issues. And I ordered everything else as far as the rewards a couple of months ago, pretty much as soon as the Kickstarter ended. So it hasn't been, I kind of anticipated that things were just going to be slow. So I try to jump on that kind of immediately. So we'll see. I'm a big fan of the USPS, and I'm big supporters of them. We'll see what happens when I package it all up and put it into the mail, but hopefully it will be coming to people very soon.
Awesome. Well, what kind of comics have you been reading in the meantime?
Not too many, I would say. I have been working my way through the Expanse book series because the sixth and final season of that show is coming back in a couple of weeks, so I wanted to catch up on that. So nice. I've been reading that, but I'm in a comic book club out here in SoCal, or in Los Angeles specifically, and we just read a really interesting Marvel book that was I think it was called Triumph and something, but anyway, it was it's a story about Doctor Doom and Doctor Strange teaming up to travel to hell and fight Mephisto to recover the soul of Doctor Doom's mother, who had made a deal with Mephisto for various reasons. And I really liked it. But I was kind of like, I wasn't super familiar with Doctor Doom. I'm not familiar with Doctor Strange outside of the movies. And I'm in a group with people that really like Fantastic Four. And so they were really excited about it. And I was like, yeah, this is pretty good. I like it. Yeah, thanks. But then at our next month's meeting, I'm very excited about, we're going to be reading The Good Asian. I think it's an Image book. But that finally dropped on Hoopla, and I'm very, very excited to get caught up on that. I read the first issue when that came out and loved it. So I've been waiting for that trade paperback, waiting for an opportunity to read it, waiting for a chance to talk about it with people. So I'm very, very excited about that.
Yeah, that book is incredible. I've loved every issue that's come out. I'm one issue behind right now, but that first arc is very solid. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about that, because again, I really just, there's just a really cool take on pulpy detective comics with a very very smart spin that relates to like modern day America that I really appreciate. So yeah, you have to let me know. I'd be interested to hear your
absolutely.
thoughts.
I'm very excited. I mean, the first issue just blew me away. I was so impressed by everything about the story, just how complicated the character was, and how complicated the world was, and how accurate it was, and how the depth of the research that the creative team did. And I hate when kind of people throw this term around, but like San Francisco as a setting really became a character of the story, and I think that was accomplished really well, where people attempt to do that in other books or movies or TV shows or whatever, where the location becomes a character. But I really think that creative team, and I'm sorry that I'm blanking on their names, but I really think that creative team really nailed that, and that's what they wanted from that book. So yeah, I'm excited to pick it up again.
Definitely. Well, Paul, what about you? How have you been? How have comic books been?
I've been good. I'm enjoying a very relaxing 4-day weekend here that's coming to a close soon, unfortunately. But had a good Thanksgiving. I had some friends over, made a fantastic vegan shepherd's pie. So the first time I made it, it turned out great. So yeah, it was nice to have people over and cook for them again. So
yeah. I saw the photo that you posted of that shepherd's pie, man. I was very jealous. I had a good Thanksgiving myself, but holy smokes, you made some delicious looking food, at least.
I'll definitely make it again. So I'll let you know you can come visit next time.
Sounds good. Put a little piece in the mail for me. I'd appreciate
perfect.
it.
Yeah, sure. Well, the nice thing about having a few days off of work is I was able to read some comics, catch up on my massive stack of floppies that's been towering in the corner of my bedroom for a while now. So made a small dent in it this weekend. A couple things that stood out I wanted to talk about. One is The Thing #1. This is a mini series that I think this came out a couple weeks ago. Written by Walter Mosley, art by Tom Riley, with colors by Jordi Belair. You may not know it because I don't really talk about the Fantastic Four that much, but Ben Grimm is probably my favorite Marvel character. But that's the problem, is that I don't read a lot of FF comics. I mainly read the older stuff. So having a new story that really sort of captures the ever-loving blue-eyed Thing, I really appreciated. It is kind of a throwback story. Walter Mosley is actually, I think this is the first comic book he's actually written. He's better known for being a crime novelist, pretty successful one. And he clearly loves the Jack and Stan Fantastic Four. And this kind of feels like a love letter to that era of the team and that era of Marvel Comics. The story sort of focuses on this mysterious figure who sort of looks like the Grim Reaper, calls himself Mott, and he's sort of haunting a couple different characters in the book. He ends up sort of almost possessing Ben Grimm, and as a result, Ben Grimm doesn't realize it, but he's pushing his friends away. He's acting pretty mean to Alicia. So isn't aware of what he's doing, but he's clearly changed personalities. It kind of has a Silver Age kind of vibe in that regard. There's some pretty fun moments in it. There's a part where Ben Grimm kind of gets thrown into a superhero drunk tank where Hercules is, and they have to break out of it. Fun little moment there. And to see the Fantastic Four, in a sort of more retro type setting always works for me better than a more contemporary Fantastic Four story. And I think part of that's because the artwork by Tom Riley is very Silver Age influence. It reminds me of Chris Samnee or Doc Shaner. So retro looking without feeling like a direct homage to Kirby. And that also helped that Jordi Belair's colors complement the type of artwork beautifully. It's a really good looking comic. If you're a fan of sort of Silver Age influenced Fantastic Four type stuff, I highly recommend it. I think it's a 6-issue series, so that's just the first issue I read. I'm kind of excited to see where it goes.
Gotcha.
It's definitely my sort of thing, and I definitely intended that pun. So,
listen, Paul, I forgot to announce that this is your last episode as of right now.
Wow, this is strict.
I mean, exactly. Gabe, things have changed since the last time you were on the show.
You're ruling it with an iron fist, not unlike Dr. Doom.
Exactly.
All right, you too. This is your last episode too.
Very briefly, I also read the last 2 issues of the Mr. Miracle, The Source of Freedom miniseries. This is a 6-issue miniseries written by Brandon Easton with art by Fico Ossio, colors by Rico Renzi, and letters by Rob Lee.
Oh.
This is all right. I'm a sucker for anything New Gods related, so obviously you're going to do a Mr. Miracle series. I'm going to check it out. It started off kind of flat for me. It kind of just felt like a generic superhero story, but the last couple issues were pretty interesting because that's finally where it got tied into the bigger sort of New Gods Kirby Fourth World mythology. And what's actually really interesting about this book is that it focuses on the Shiloh Norman Mr. Miracle, not Scott Free.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an implication toward the end of the story that the Scott Free and Big Barda that we're familiar with don't exist in this particular DCU timeline. They seem to have been erased somehow. And the main focus of this particular miniseries is Mr. Miracle, Shiloh Norman, fighting against a woman that claims to be the daughter of Big Barda and Scott Free. She goes by the name Never. Get it? Never Free.
All right.
Sorry. I didn't write that one. You can't blame me.
Brandon Easton.
Don't shoot the messenger. But it's sort of a fun, sort of generic superhero story. The problem with doing New Gods type stuff is that, Kirby never intended it to be part of the mainstream DC universe. So a lot of it never quite fits. And then if you're trying to do a New Gods type story, you either end up doing too much of a Kirby homage, or you deviate from it so much it doesn't even feel like it's related. So it's in a tough bind for creators. I understand that. In the end, it was a fun story. I do think the implications it raises for the status of the New Gods in the current DCU is interesting. Unfortunately, that might be the most interesting part of the story. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I enjoyed it. I'm kind of curious to see where they go from here, if they try to explain more of the background, how Big Barda and Scott's daughter came back from the future to kind of erase the lineage of Mr. Miracle. And that's another interesting thing. Mr. Miracle is a character that's always been rooted in an idea of legacy and lineage. Even the Kirby stuff is Scott Free takes over the name Mr. Miracle from Thaddeus Brown, and then Scott Free passes it on to Shiloh Norman. It's a character that's always had this idea of lineage and legacy rooted into it. So it's kind of curious to see them playing with that in this story, at least.
Interesting.
I didn't know that about the original intention of Jack Kirby, that it wasn't supposed to be part of the overall DCU. I mean, it's so ingrained into it now. I mean, like the Justice League movie and a lot of the Justice League animated TV shows and things like that, and now even in the Harley Quinn TV show, it's such a big part of it. I hadn't realized that at all.
Yeah, and I as far as I know, I think Kirby he took over the he had his 3 books, then he also took over the Superman's Pal Jimmy Olsen title, so he introduces Superman into some of the story. But as far as the New Gods being a sort of basis for the cosmology and stuff as they've become, I think that all came after he left. So
gotcha.
Might be my interpretation, but as far as I know, he never really wanted that. Same thing with the Eternals, which is a whole other discussion. But it's a lot of his creator-owned stuff, quote unquote, never really seems to fit in with the mainstream Big Two continuity for that regard.
Right.
Is that why in the King Gerard's Mr. Miracle, there's he's Scott is wearing the shirts of all the superheroes, and there's a little Batman toy that the kid has and things like that. The heroes exist almost in that book as kind of as media properties as opposed to actually people that they interact with, or am I totally missing the mark on that?
I never made that connection, but that makes sense. I think I need to reread that series. Admittedly, it's been a while, and I think going back,
it's been a while for me too. I just remember those details though.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to go back and reread it now to see, is the implication that it's taking place in an alternate timeline, or is it in fact that Scott's dead the entire series, which would sort of explain this particular Mr. Miracle mini I was just talking about. But
right,
that's an interesting thing. Yeah. Again, the New Gods, I love them unconditionally, and I love New Gods stories, but they are an odd fit in the mainstream DCU.
I will say Fico Ossio on this book. I mean, that art is insane. Fico Ossio also does the art on No Bet. Oh my gosh, the words are escaping my mouth in ways that I did not intend. No One Left to Fight. That's the thing. Right. Sorry, I just watched the James Bond No Good Time to Die or whatever. It's all the words are just in my brain. So anyways, Fico Ossio, incredible artist. Interesting to see them not working on this No One Left to Fight book, which is a Technicolor acid splash constantly in your face. So I just looked up a little bit of their art on this Mr. Miracle book, and it seems to be a little bit more toned down, but still very, very vibrant and dynamic.
It's
really
very
cool.
kinetic.
Yeah, kinetic. Yeah, great word there. Well, for me this week, I want to shout out a couple of books that I read on top of, I actually saw human beings for the first time that weren't my wife or the people that live downstairs in my house for the first time in a very long time, which was nice. I drank a lot of Christmas themed whiskey, which I didn't know that was a thing, but I've discovered there are 2 bottles of it that just disappeared over the 4 days that my friends were here. But yeah, I did manage to make some time to read comics on top of all of that. I read Anne Frank's Diary, a graphic adaptation by Ari Foldman, adapted by Ari Foldman, illustrated by David Polanski. This was Aaron's pick from our Goodreads challenge that we're doing this year. I'm really trying to narrow that gap. I think we've got 2.5 weeks left as of today's recording to finish that up. So everyone should get on that. I've only got like 4 books left. And but yeah, I read this and this was super engaging from start to finish. I think for one, it helps that I think Anne Frank was a pretty good writer he's a smaller, kid in her early teens, which makes a really interesting adaptation for Ari Foldman to take in. And they noted at the end of the book that they had to compress some of the early pieces and some of just the various chunks of Anne Frank's diary because there was a lot of it, and you can only illustrate so much in the story. But I was really, really impressed how they were still able to deliver an extremely powerful, just look at this person's life through their diary. And I had never read anything of Anne Frank's diary before, so I was pretty unfamiliar other than just kind of the basic idea of her and her family went into hiding. And eventually, Nazis found her family, and that was, the unfortunate end for them. But yeah, given that they were able to adapt this, and I think Polanski does a very good job of just capturing Germany and Denmark and Poland and all the various countries that they touch on very, very well. But yeah, the last 50 pages of this book are some of the most powerful things that I've read in a long time, both the adapted stuff and illustrated pieces, as well as just the straight prose that were dropped into this book, just not prose, just straight diary entries that were added into just left in the book. And Foldman noted in the afterword that there were some of the entries that they were we didn't really want to touch this. We didn't want to change anything about it because you could tell that Anne's writing capability got better and better and better as she spent so much time reading and talking and obviously playing with a lot of things that she was trying to write. Some of these entries are just poetic and beautiful to read. And the last entry in her diary, which is the last section of the book, is just a tragically mundane entry. I mean, she's just going about everything else and talking about day-to-day life, living in this, annex, as the secret annex that she called it. And the fact that was her last entry, it wasn't oh no, they're going to come get us. Oh no, we're worried. It was just I don't even remember what it was about, but it was just typical, just a standard thing for her to be writing about. And then there's just this big, bold, this is the last entry, shook me. And I did not think that I was going to be so emotionally invested in this thing. And it really, really just knocked me over in the last couple pages. So if you're not participating in the Goodreads reading challenge, I highly recommend you read this book regardless, if only because, incredibly powerful story. Anne Frank's Diary has been around for a very long time. I think a lot of people have probably read it and touched on it in some capacity, but as a comic book nerd, this is kind of the only way to get me to read stuff. And this one did a great job at just getting me really into the history behind all of it. So yeah, highly recommend that.
I'm not Jewish myself, but I do believe that tomorrow is the first night of Hanukkah. So if I think that if you haven't read this, it's probably a good time to jump in on it and reflect. So I might be picking it up this week as well. I've only heard good things about this. I know that it was nominated for an Eisner a couple of years ago. I don't know if it won, but yeah, I've only ever heard good things about this book. So I should probably finally pick this up as well.
Yeah, it's very, very good. I mean, I think you can grab it probably at a library. I don't know if it's on Hoopla, depending on where you live and stuff. But yeah, it's totally worth every penny you can spend on it. I think I might need to get a hard copy for myself because it was very, very good. I said 5 out of 5 in my at the end of my notes here.
Was it written more like a graphic memoir than a graphic novel? Because I've read a couple of graphic memoirs, and it's that type of thing is kind of the words take precedent over the images. So it's the images are sometimes unconnected, or they're just one or each cell is a scene, and then it kind of jumps around. Or is it a continuous linear story through the panels, and the words are not secondary, but are just kind of in there?
Yeah, it's kind of a mix of both. The earlier half of the book, I think the first half of the book is more interpretations based on Anne's writings, and so you get a lot of her writing, but also there's a lot more graphic, just comics to it, like sequential imagery. And once you get towards the latter half of the book, it's more like full page of prose, maybe an image of interpretation, next full page of prose with another page of interpretation, couple of sequences, and then more prose. Because like I said, Foldman really, I think, wanted to highlight like Anne's writing capability. And I think they did a good job of mixing the right imagery based on things that they had shown us earlier in the adaptation about, they introduced us to all the various people that were in her life at the time. And then as the graphic novel continues, the actual day-to-day interactions become less important than what Anne was actually writing. Like, she stops talking about, just like, oh, I had this conversation with this person. And instead she starts to kind of philosophize a little bit about her thoughts of various things. And of course she's a teenager. And so she's talking about like, sex and learning about like what sex is and how like boys learn this and girls learn that. It's like, it's kind of all over the place. But then again, she was a teenager, Right. So yeah, it's a mix, I think, I guess is the short answer there. But yeah, I would really recommend it. It's fantastic. But I do want to move on really quick. I want to talk about two other things. I read The Blue Flame number 1 through 5. This is from Vault Comics. Danny in our chat reminded me that I needed to get on this book because I had been pulling it. I just hadn't been reading it. This is Christopher Cantwell and Kurt Michael Russell together. This number 1 had a really interesting start, and then I fell off. Sometimes you just miss books, but I grabbed all the rest of the issues. And I was kind of stunned by how well this book read, if only because the story of it is really, really harsh. Like, there's this guy, he's called the Blue Flame. He's part of a vigilante group in his little small town of, I guess not small town, of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or Minnesota, wherever Milwaukee is. And I don't know. Listen, guys, I only know so many things. But yeah, they live in Milwaukee, and someone walks into this thing where him and his vigilante group of regular human being people get gunned down. Right. On the flip side of the story, the Blue Flame, our main character, is a spacefaring superhero who can fly in jets, and he's, got whatever kind of superpowers that come with that. He gets brought down to this planet, and these aliens say, hey, you have to represent all of humanity, all the humans on Earth. You're going to determine whether or not we should destroy them or not, because we are part of the Galactic Council and blah, 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 blah. This book is, it seems like it's kind of wacky, but the parallels of the story of reading about this guy who is the Blue Flame on Earth in Milwaukee, who gets shot and paralyzed or partially paralyzed. And then the Blue Flame, this same guy out in space trying to represent this and save humanity is really, really interesting. Like, I don't want to spoil it too much, but like the whole story of you have to save humanity, and this guy has the same memories as his Earth parallel, as the same person who's out in space. You're kind of questioning like what's real, what's fake, and what's the point. And, if all this bad stuff is happening to this guy on Earth, and we keep reading about all these bad things happening on Earth, why would he want to protect humans out in space? So yeah, I think Cantwell and everybody working on this book, they do a really good job writing this incredibly thin line of like, is this offensive? Is this going too far? Are they asking the right questions without actually being, I guess like kind of rude about folks that have bad things happen to them? Like, I don't know how else to describe it other than that, but I think despite a few maybe minor stumbling points, I'm super hooked in. I'm ready to read issue 6, which comes out this week. Yeah, it's pretty cool, pretty interesting book. I fucking Vault Comics. I don't know what it is in the water over there. I swear, every time I pick something up, I go, I never thought that this could have been a comic book, and this is another perfect example of that. Yeah,
I'm at the point with Vault where I almost try pretty much any number 1 that they put out. Whether I stick with it or not is to be seen. I remember reading the first issue of this and liking it. For whatever reason, probably budgetary reasons, I didn't end up picking up any more. So I probably grabbed the trade of that. I remember enjoying the hook enough to want to see how it resolves, so to speak.
I don't know how long it's going to be. It doesn't seem like number 6 is going to be the last issue based on where the story is right now, but we'll see.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, this sounds really awesome. I'm looking for it on Hoopla right now.
Yeah, no, it's totally worth. Again, like Paul said, I think it'd probably be worth reading as a collection. I read 1 through 5 in a go, and it was like it's really, really well paced. Like Cantwell does a fantastic job of making sure the book hits like a really good set of beats without moving too fast or too quick. So Finally, I just want to say this really quick because I'm eating my own words here today. Last week on the show, I said I'll never, ever read that new Donny Cates, Ryan Otley, Frank Martin, DC's Corey Petit Hulk #1. Never. I'll eat my own shoe if it comes down to that. I think I said something along those lines. And then our good friend Danny, who I mentioned a bit ago in the Discord, he put a gun to my head and said, "Mike, if you don't read this book, pulling the trigger." No, it was no, he sent me a code. He bought a couple variants for the Hulk book, and so he sent me one of his Marvel Digital Redeem codes. So I decided, okay, I'll give this book a shot, because as much as I want to be a jerk and be like, I'm never reading another Donny Cates book ever again for no reason, there's no excuse. So I sat down, I read this book. It's definitely a really well-drawn Ryan Otley book. It definitely, I don't know, I went into this book with a lot of preconceived notions about what it could be and what it should be, and I really should just accept that it's a Marvel #1. So it's going to do a lot of Marvel #1 things, like have a big action sequence, reinterpret a character in a way that seems interesting, but is actually just the same thing that people have been doing for years. It's going to have all of the Marvel superheroes show up for no reason other than the fact that somebody probably wanted to make sure that Doctor Strange and Iron Man and Spider-Man and whoever showed up in the background in some capacity. And yeah, it definitely is a book that recognizes that the Immortal Hulk book happened, in the fact that Bruce Banner says, "The Hulk is immortal, I am not." To which I was like, okay, yeah. So ultimately, I was not really into this book that much. Like it was really cool looking. Like Ryan Otley draws some of the most interesting action comics that you can buy. I don't care who you are. If you go read some of his Invincible stuff, it's some of the most brutal, kinetic, beautiful word from earlier, comics that you can read. But like, do I think I'm going to keep reading this? Probably not. I might pick it up in trade if the story goes somewhere that actually has something that could be beyond just what I expect out of a Marvel book, which is to like play within a very well-defined box with references to things that everyone seems to need to know, but I had no idea about. Yeah, I don't know. I really wasn't into the overall story. I was surprised that it wasn't a 64-page brand new #1 with it being Donny Cates, but I'm really not worried about this book continuing by any means. It's a Donny Cates book. He prints money basically over at Marvel. So I think I will probably check out the trade. I'm breaking Danny's heart in our Discord chat right now, and I feel so bad. I think he actually left. I think he really is not listening anymore. But yeah, I don't know. It's just, I feel so fucked up, because how do you going from this massive run by Al Ewing on Immortal Hulk into a new #1 with Hulk? I feel like it's destined for failure, no matter who's helming the book. So maybe my expectations were too high. I don't really know, but I feel like this happens whenever I pick up like Amazing Spider-Man, or I pick up a new Black Panther, or I pick up an Immortal Iron Fist. I picked up that Iron Fist book a while ago, and it was all the same shit of just like, it doesn't feel like you're trying anything new other than perpetuating what this character is. And Donny Cates' whole twist on this book stems from this idea that I think a lot of writers have already run with, that the Hulk is multiple personalities and Bruce Banner is, just one of them. But to go into that the same way, or in like a slightly different way, and playing with this idea of what if the Hulk was protecting Bruce Banner from us and not the other way around, it is interesting, and that's a good question. I just felt like the execution wasn't great. I personally am not a fan of Madman Bruce Banner, which I think a lot of people are, and I had just I'm not making excuses for this book.
It's okay, Mike.
I'm not making excuses for this book. I'm probably not going to read more until it gets collected. Then we'll see. That's all.
Okay.
Anyways. We should move on.
I gotta jump back in. I don't think I understood the assignment here, because I did have one more comic I wanted to talk about.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Gabe, go ahead. Go for it.
Sorry about that. Was there other stuff? I'm
it.
like the guest that's like screwing everything up. I feel really bad about this right now.
No, go for it. Jump right into it.
Okay, so the other thing that I read this week, and it'll relate to our discussion a little bit later, was I finally picked up the first trade for Something is Killing the Children.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So Boom Studios, James Tinney in the fourth, and I hope I'm saying this correctly, Werther Del Adera. I overall enjoyed this comic. I didn't know really anything about it except that it has been critically acclaimed. It's been recommended to me by a couple of people. So I had it bookmarked on Hoopla for a while, and just kind of let it collect dust on the digital pile for probably, I don't know when it first came out, but I think that I bookmarked it when it first came out. So it's been there for a long time. Mm-hmm. But overall, I liked it. I'm glad I picked it up. I first of all, I love the art. It's dark and scratchy, has very fine outlines. The artist, again, butchering this name, Deladera. Colors and textures are extremely cool. Facial expressions are great, subtle when they need to be, over the top when they need to be. I work with an Italian artist on some of my comics. The Love at First Bite and Into the Wilderness, done by an Italian artist named Elisa Menegel. Mm-hmm. So I kind of recognize that Italian kind of style in it, for lack of a better term. And so I identified with that, and I really, really liked it from that art. Some of the visuals were confusing in the action sequences, but it might have been because I wasn't paying attention closely enough, which is something that I do. The main characters are really cool. You can definitely tell how much Tinian loves the characters, which is very important. And it had this cool Western quality to it, where it's about a mysterious gunslinger that blows into town, and nobody there trusts them, but she's the only one that can solve the problem because she kind of lives outside of the world that they all live in, and walks in between the worlds of normal perceived humanity and the supernatural, which is, I think, is very, very cool. And I think that it was good that it was like it was a horror comic, and I don't really pick up a lot of horror comics, but it did feel like, and I feel like a criticism could legitimately be, or that it basically feels like a superhero comic disguised as a horror comic because of all the things that I just mentioned about the main character.
Yeah. Sure.
Where it's like she's really in charge of everything. She's really ahead of everybody. She's, essentially like Batman. She's incredibly skilled fighter, like all of these things. So it's like, James Tinian, are you really stepping outside of your comfort zone here? Or are you just writing another comic, another superhero comic?
Listen, this book is critically acclaimed. Everyone loves it. Okay, you're not allowed to speak ill of it, Gabe. Oh my god!
I know I'm gonna get a lot of hate for this, but I liked it overall, and I think I will continue reading it because I enjoyed the mystery of it. And like I said, I mean, I'm down with the mysterious gunslinger, lone wolf kind of storyline because I love westerns, and obviously I love superhero comics, or else I wouldn't be here. But so I'm down with it, but it's like, is a term like groundbreaking and like extremely unique? Are these terms I would use? Not really. Good and entertaining and engaging, like absolutely. But this doesn't change comics, I would say. Gotcha. So if anybody's out there saying that, then I disagree with them.
Gotcha. This is pretty critically acclaimed, I should say. But yeah, go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've not read this, but I've been meaning to, mainly because I've really been enjoying Tinian's other horror title, The Nice House on the Lake, which is fantastic and does not feel like a superhero story. It's much creepier. The artwork is fantastic. So I'd say if you enjoyed this one, maybe check that one out too. So
yeah, definitely. I like the creepy elements of it. I mean, that's what makes it, what separates it from a superhero comic in my mind. Like the way that he does kind of take it to that place that makes your skin crawl or makes you feel uncomfortable reading it, but not want to look away. I like those elements about it. I'm a pretty big Stephen King fan, so I'm down for that kind of stuff.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I think his new series just came out. That's like a sister series to this Something is Killing the Children. I think it's called House of Slaughter. I think the first issue or two is out of that, and I heard that that's supposed to be pretty good as well. So I mean, if you do continue reading, at least there's more beyond just the one single storyline, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's move on. Let's talk about comic books that are coming out soon, or comic books that we are planning to read very soon. What's on the top of your pile this week? I'm going to pitch over to you, Paul. What are you reading next?
Well, I looked what was coming out this week, and this title jumped out at me. It is Batman the Detective #6. This is the final issue of the miniseries, written by Tom Taylor with art by Andy Kubert. I think it's Andy, right? Andy does Batman and Adam does Wolverine. Is that how it works? That's how I remember the two.
Just throw Kubert at it. It's fine.
Exactly. No, it is Andy.
Thanks, Danny.
Thanks. Yeah, this has been a really fun story. I mean, Tom Taylor is a writer I've grown to like more and more. I'm willing to give anything he writes a shot.
Sure.
And of course, he's writing Batman. Of course, I'm going to enjoy it. I think Andy Kubert is really a great modern Batman artist. He worked on Grant Morrison's Batman. He worked with Frank Miller on Batman. He really has established himself. He is to Batman what his brother Adam is to Wolverine, I guess, at this point. Overall, it's a really fun story. It sort of tackles the consequences of Batman's actions. The whole premise is Batman has to go to England to investigate a mysterious group called Equilibrium. It turns out Equilibrium has been, quote unquote, balancing the scales, they're murdering people to balance the scales of lives Batman has saved, which is kind of an interesting, almost like Silver Agey kind of villain, premise. Mm-hmm. And Batman gets to team up with his old friends Knight and Squire.
Wait, did Morrison write this? Oh no, Tom Taylor wrote this. Never mind.
Yeah. And then it does have a very sort of interesting balance between being a very serious, and gritty Batman story at times, and also being silly. There's a part where Batman has a giant like semi truck that has a mobile bat cave in it that he's driving around through the streets of London.
Hell yeah.
And it's pretty great. I mean, you can't, that's what I want from a Batman comic. So I think it's a fun story. I have to say, I do have a very sort of a very niche love for certain Batman stories where it is Batman, training to become Batman. When Bruce is learning the skills he needs to become Batman. Mm-hmm. I love those types of stories. And part of this story is he reunites with his mentor, Henri Ducard. One of the guys who helped train Bruce to become Batman, who knows Bruce really well. That's a very particular type of Batman story I really like. So I was excited to see him tackle that in this miniseries. So if you're looking for a good standalone Batman story, I think once this is collected, might be a good one to check out.
Is this the Knight and Squire from the Batman Incorporated run, or is that just all washed away in the retcon that is the ever flowing river of comics?
Sort of. That Knight is gone, so that Squire is now become Knight, and they have a new Squire. So it's kind of the same team, similar to like Robin becoming Batman for a while. So yeah,
gotcha. Well, Gabe, what about you? What are you reading next, or what are you excited for next from your to read pile?
So I'm excited, and I'm going to be reading next White Ash, which is from Scout Comics, written by Charlie Stickney and art by Connor Hughes and colors by Finn Crabb. This is one of the best indie comics from one of the best small press publishers from one of the best indie comic writers on Kickstarter, Charlie Stickney. Just really, really a great book. If you're into fantasy adventure, it's also got, I wouldn't call it YA, but it's about a character that is in their late teens, early 20s, kind of learning who they are, not necessarily coming of age, but certainly a better understanding of the secrets of their origins. Charlie Stickney is a friend of mine. I hope he is not listening right now, because he might find out that I'm not completely caught up on his book, even though I really like it.
Oh my gosh.
And despite backing it on Kickstarter. But like it is on my list of things that I need to read. And so hopefully talking about it here will motivate me to finally get caught up on it. The trade paperback finally dropped on Hoopla, so I'm excited to get back into it. It's just a really cool modern fantasy book, which I think is really clever and original, and has a big cast, and is set against a large background of very full and complete and thought out and all those kinds of things world. So if you're looking for a gateway into indie comics, into the community, or if you just love fantasy comics, I do recommend checking out this book.
Very cool.
Sure.
Very cool. Well, now, I mean, you've convinced me to at least give it a try. I'm always so hesitant with Scout Comics, and I don't know why. If only because I feel like they put out so many comics. I'm just like, how is that possible?
Yeah, it is. They're very impressive. I would say.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll give this one a shot, and I'll dive right into the Scout Comics backlog of comics, where I know that there is a shitload of comics ready for me.
I think it's kind of the same. I mean, you mentioned Vault earlier. I think it's kind of the same thing, where it's very impressive how much good stuff they're putting out.
Right. Well, like I said, I'll give this one a shot. Why not? Anyways, let's move on real quick. I I'll get into my pick. But before I get into that, I want to shout out our buddy Danny who's hanging out with us. If you come and join us listening live, whenever we record this show, you can also get your pick shouted out on the show. Danny is reading Wonder Woman Historia, the Amazon's #1. I don't even know what this Wonder Woman Historia thing is. Maybe someone will have to tell me in the break. But for me this week, my pick is Human Target #2. This is the Tom King, Greg Smallwood book that looks really, 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 really cool. Whether or not the story's going to be there, we'll see with #2. I really liked #1 overall. Thought it was a beautiful looking book. I think the entire comics Twitter internet that I'm on also loved the look of this book. And the twist at the end is pretty fun. I think a big whodunit sounds like a really fun book in the DC universe. So I'm excited to see where Tom King and Greg Smallwood take us. The question is, can Tom King do what Ed Brubaker does in his sleep? That's what I think everyone out there is asking. So, which is tell a good mystery crime book. So we'll see. But until then, we'll talk about this maybe a little bit more in the break. But when we come back, we're going to be talking about how we hoist comics from our backlog. We're going to take a break here. I've got a whole list of comics that I'm very ashamed that I haven't read yet that I listed today. So get ready for that. But we're going to take a break and we'll be back in just a second. This week on I Read Comic Books, we're asking the question, how do you hoist comics from your backlog so that you finally can get around to reading them? I know that I'm terrible about this as someone who collects a lot of digital comics like a madman whenever there's a sale, such as this weekend during Black Friday and stuff. But I'm curious, Gabe, Paul, when you guys are thinking about comics in your backlog, what is it that drives you to finally say, you know what, I'm sitting down, I'm finally reading East of West. I don't care what anyone says or whatever the comic may be. What's one that you've read?
That it's 1,000 pages long.
yeah. But what goes through your head when you're just like, I'm finally going to read this book? What makes you finally say, I'm going to sit down and do this? I don't know. And what's one that you've done that with that recently? I guess I'll pitch over to you first, Gabe.
Well, the one that I did that recently with was Something Is Killing the Children. It's been like I said, it's been sitting in my pile for a while. I haven't read a lot of JT4. I read Batman Eternal. I read Batman and Robin Eternal, and I wasn't like bowled over in love with them. So it's been. I've heard that it's good. I saw a sample of the art and I was into it, and I'm into just finding those indie comic books that, the #1 starts the story anew and just jumping into a world without knowing anything. I love doing that. But, I was hesitant with James Tynion IV. I just, the things that I had read, I wasn't in love with. And the other part of it is that I don't seek out horror comics. I have read ones that I liked for sure, but it's not my main thing that I do. So, coming on this podcast, talking about that we were going to talk about this topic ahead of time kind of forced me to read this one in particular. And now, as I said, the same thing with White Ash, where I've been putting off getting caught up on that. It's an amazing book. Charlie's a great guy. He's helped me with some of my Kickstarter stuff personally. And so I just need a reason, like saying it on a podcast to get caught up to where I left off where I left off.
No, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
What about you, Paul? Is there any book in particular that you've finally put your foot down and said you're going to read?
Well, yeah, again, like Gabe said, the main impetus to do it was the deadline for this episode. Since this was the topic, so the best way to get through your backlog comics is to co-host a podcast and be forced to talk about them.
Okay.
No, I recently moved to a new apartment, so a lot of that was going through my long boxes, trying to pare down my collection, finding stuff I forgot I had, or finding stuff that I've been meaning to read for a while. So the physical presence of this stuff definitely helps. I'm sure I have a massive collection of digital comics that I've not read that I bought, and I'll probably never get to because it's out of sight, out of mind. But actually having the physical comics sort of sitting there taunting you that you haven't gotten to them yet is the best motivation to read them. So as I was going through my stuff, I found the 6-issue miniseries Annihilator, written by Grant Morrison, art by Fraser Irving, came out way back in 2015, published by Legendary. And I had all the single issues. I think it took me a while to track them all down because Legendary is now a major publisher. It's sort of a weird offshoot of the film studio Legendary, which is a whole other discussion maybe.
I was just going to ask, what the hell?
So it did take me a while to find all the 6 issues. And of course, by the time I got all 6, I had moved on to other stuff. So I finally sat down to read them, and it's really fucking good. I mean, come on, it's Grant Morrison and Fraser Irving.
Right.
It's a really fucking good comic. I'm glad I finally made time to read it. I'm kicking myself for not reading it sooner, but now that it's in my wheelhouse of stuff I've read, I might go back and actually reread it to pick apart all the details and stuff. So I think, long story short, I think having the comics there staring at you every day is the best motivation to finally sit down and read them.
I just did a quick Google search of this book, and of course, when you search Legendary Comic, when you search Annihilator Comic,
right,
it comes up with the Legendary film studio website, but they have a whole comic section. My mind is breaking because I forgot that this is a thing. In my mind, I'm just oh yeah, Legendary, that's an offshoot of Archaea Comics or something, some random publisher. But no, it's Legendary, the film production company, because when you go to their website, the first thing you see is Dune. What the fuck?
Yeah. And as far as I know, they've mainly published adaptations or spin-offs of IP that they own. I think this is one of the few original series they did. This is around the time Morrison was, I think, talking about doing some film work. I know that they had written a screenplay at one point that was sitting in production hell for years. So it's probably why they had a connection to Legendary. But I do think this is actually, I mean, I know this is sort of off topic, but this is one of the better Grant Morrison creator-owned books that I've read. I think it's a great story. It plays with metatext. The premise is that it follows a screenwriter who's trying to write a sci-fi epic, and then the main character from the book shows up at the guy's front door it tells him I forgot how the story goes. You have to write it for me to help me remember. There's a parallel story between the screenwriter having cancer or brain cancer, and the story he's writing being about a creative person that's locked in a prison spaceship that's circling a black hole at the center of the universe. It's high concept in a way that I want from Morrison. It's also very funny at times. And again, it's Fraser Irving doing the artwork, and it looks absolutely amazing. So thanks for reminding me that this book exists by making me look through my backlist.
Well, comics, I just want to say other Legendary books that we all could dive in on really quick here. The Great Wall, that movie also has a comic. Trick or Treat, the series has movies. And there's a bunch of Godzilla books and King Kong books, which makes sense. But then there is a what looks like a children's book called Kong and Me, featuring a giant King Kong and a small little girl. I don't know why some of these are being published. This is absurd. And of all of them, there's only a handful that even look remotely attractive that I would want to check out, particularly Annihilator, maybe some of the Pacific Rim comics, because I think Pacific Rim in concept is an interesting idea. But anyways, so now you've created a new backlog for me, Paul.
Oh, no.
How dare you?
That'll be the next Patreon series will be us reading the Legendary catalog.
Yeah, and let's play with the idea that this is all part of a shared universe too. Let's lean into that. Well, that's really interesting. I mean, it's funny because I find myself constantly telling me, Mike, saying, hey, me, Mike, you need to read more of your backlog. You backed all these comics on Kickstarter. You've backed, you bought all these digital comics in a sale, or somebody said that you should read this thing a while ago and you told them, yeah, and then never read it. And so I always find myself just randomly going through either my bookshelf or my digital list of books that I have in a Dropbox folder from Kickstarter, or just my backlog on Kindle. I'm not trying to brag or flex that I've got a bunch of comics. I'm irresponsible, you guys, is what I'm saying. And so every once in a while, I'll just randomly pick up a series and be I'm reading all of this. That's what happened to me recently with Mega Hex. I was you know what? The Simon Hanselman books, they're pretty darn funny. And I feel like I had a good time when I read them, in the sense that I enjoy laughing at people making terrible, constantly bad mistakes.
Yes. And
so I read all of the Mega Hex books, right? And this is Simon Hanselman's just strip comic that gets collected from zines and online publishing, and they publish things all over everywhere, and then Fantagraphics collects them all into these books that kind of represent a chunk of time in which Hanselman was publishing them. And they are just awful, in terms of people. The books themselves are very funny. I find the humor to be crass and really dark, and just super edgy. Like Hanselman is clearly trying to push the limits of like what they think they're comfortable with, what they think readers are comfortable with, and just like being true to the awful, horrible decisions and chaotic decisions that Meg and Mog, this witch and this cat, make with their friend Werewolf Jones and Owl. I'm not giving any descriptor of this book, but I promise you, if you read this, you will either love it or hate it in a way that you've never hated a comic before. There is no middle ground on these books. And I really have to appreciate that Tia turned me on to these books a long time ago. And she was like, they're so funny. And then I read it and I was like, am I allowed to think some of this stuff is funny? Because like it's really, really dark. But yeah, I read through all of them. And it just so happened that Hanselman published their latest book, Crisis Zone, which was the quarantine comics version of Meg and Mog, where you're going to watch these characters who have been clearly making bad decisions with drugs and personal decisions and all this other stuff during the time of COVID. Which like, how much darker can you get, like in a contextual modern day sense? So it's really interesting to read through all of these books. I still haven't read all of Crisis Zone, if only because I'm kind of savoring it. Yeah. But maybe that says a lot about who I am, that I would want to savor a book like this. But I really enjoy it. And it's like, I get this inclination in my head to just dig into them, like dig into a series to just be like, fuck it, I'm reading all of this, as kind of like, if only it kind of like a way that I was filling a gap that I had when I was reading all of One Piece last year. So like One Piece being 1,000 chapters now, you know, to read all of that in a year is like, you're reading like 100 chapters a month. Right. And that's 14 to 20 pages per chapter. I mean, like you start to math that out. It's like, holy shit, you're reading a lot of comics. And when you stop doing that, suddenly there is a hole in your life where you're like, what do I fill my time with, you know? So I've been slowly but surely getting through my backlog, but I still, you know, every time I feel like I knock a couple books out, like 6 more fill their places, I'm reminded, oh yeah, I backed that thing, or I've got this series, or I've been sitting on this run. So yeah, I don't know. It's a tough thing to grapple with, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, I mean the backlog just gets bigger and bigger. That's the problem, is that you can never make a big dent in it because something else is always going to catch your eye and end up in there. And again, I didn't even try to look at my digital collection. I'm sure if I pulled up my Comixology account and looked at the books that I bought years ago and never got to, it'd be even more depressing. So I just try to focus on the physical books I see every day when I'm walking around to, you know, my apartment and look at the bookshelves that are taunting me. So
yeah.
And you're right, when something, you finish something that you really loved, it just leaves a hole in your heart, and you're like, I wish I could have more of that thing, and I just don't feel like picking up this new thing is going to be what gets it there. So they end up just sitting there, you know, like unread for years, and then you finally read it and you're like, oh man, like I really should have read Sweet Tooth earlier because I really liked it, or things like that. I mean, that was one of the most recent ones that I just like had been putting off for so long and then just devoured when I started reading it. You know, do you feel like it's because you've been burned by so many bad ones, or do you feel like it is just the challenge of starting? Because I mean, I'd be interested to hear what you guys feel kind of either way.
I think for me, it's more the being in the right mind frame. You know, there's a lot of books that I know are acclaimed or, you know, would require a lot of attention that maybe I just don't have at that moment. You know, it took me a long time. I only recently started reading, you know, Sandman, I think last year, because again, it's such a daunting, you know, titan in comics history. It's like I have to make sure I'm giving it the right attention. I'm in the right mind frame. I still haven't read all of it because, you know, it's a lot to deal with. But when I was trying to read it, you know, I think I made it to the first 5 collections or so. It felt like a daunting task. I'm glad I finally did it. But again, in my mind, it was built up to this big thing that I needed to dedicate myself to. So that can be overwhelming at times.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to make a really bad joke about, well, Paul only reads stuff before the movie comes out so that he can be that guy.
That's right.
Oh, I definitely do that.
Yeah.
No, well, that was going to be the thing that I was going to say. You know, like I feel intimidated by books. I definitely agree with that. Where it's sometimes you're like, I can't just flippantly read this thing, right? Like Die is the perfect example of a book where I was like, yeah, I'll read it month to month, and then as soon as I got over the first arc and a half, I was like, I don't I don't think I'm actually grasping what the theme of this story is, right? Like I can already
Absolutely.
tell that I'm like getting overwhelmed and that like I'm not picking things up that I should month to month, losing character threads and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, I get intimidated by books sometimes and I'll just go, well, fuck it. I'll buy it until it ends, even if it's bad, just so that I can read all of it, you know? And I could name a handful of books that I bought all of them and went, why? Why did I keep reading? You know, why did I keep buying that? And it was because I wanted to collect them all and actually read them in a go. But like Die, for instance, was really interesting in that I don't think that I could have read it even arc by arc. I had to have read the whole book in a sitting, which like, let's take a step back and argue about the whole, should this be a graphic novel or a serialized comic kind of thing? But but even then it was like Die, I read the first arc and then I was like, okay, this is a lot. And the second arc came out and I was like, and I read all of it again. It's like, I can't keep reading, you know, the entire series every time another 6 issues comes out. So I just waited until the end.
I had the exact same experience with Die, where I was like, the second trade paperback dropped and I was like, all right, cool. And then I started to read it and I'm like, oh, I have no idea what happened in the first one. Like, I just like completely forgotten it. I got like one issue too, and I was like, okay, I'll pick it up. I'll remember what happened. I was like, oh, I have no idea what's going on. And then, you know, I had to reread the first one and then reread the second one. And then, you know, waiting another 6 months or whatever for the next one, I was like, oh, this is not a good idea. I just have to wait until this is all finished.
Yeah. And I mean, and I don't think that this is us like knocking Kieran Gillen and Stephanie Hans by any means. I think this is like that particular story required a level of attention to detail that you don't get by reading month to month or even arc to arc sometimes, especially with it only being 4 volumes long and only being so many issues long. Like, it's not bad to say like, yeah, I'm going to just not read it until it comes out because I like what I read already and I know that the rest is going to be good. Even if the end of, you know, some books, I'm not saying this one, but some books are maybe not as great as you would want, you still would want to, you know, at least read it all in one go so that you can get a full grasp on the story. So I totally get that.
Yeah. And it's the same reason, you know, that happened to me with Die, and it's the same reason I haven't picked up Gideon Falls yet. And I know because I read the first issue and I liked it and I know it's done, and I haven't been able to go back to it because I do want to read it all in one sitting. And I'm a big Jeff Lemire fan. So I've already, this is the second book I've mentioned of his in the last 5 minutes, but
right.
So I need to go back. I want to read it all in one go. And I know that there's always going to be debates within the community, which is better to do it. Is it, you know, read it by the floppies? Is it wait till it's all done? You know, it's, but I'm just that person and I can't help it.
Yeah. I mean, there's no shame. However you're reading comics, like, doesn't matter because you're reading comics, right? Like our group is so small. This group of people who are reading comics is so small in comparison to pretty much anything else out there. Like,
unless you're reading it on your phone, in which case you're a garbage person. No, I'm kidding.
But I understand what you mean. Like, it's tough because like some books I would never imagine not reading month to month, right?
Yeah.
Like Immortal Hulk, I kept up with the entire time. Like, is that the way that Marvel tells stories, the way Al Ewing tells stories, or is it just like that story's so memorable compared to like Wasted Space, right? Like I just finished that because the last issue came out and I told myself it's coming to an end. I stopped at like issue 12 or 15 or something. And I was like, I'm just going to read it all. I like what I read so far. I just couldn't keep up every week. And I wonder why that is. I don't know if there's an answer to it, but I'm like, some books I can totally keep up with their complicated plots and some books I just can't, depending, you know, maybe that's just the time that I read it, the feeling that I was feeling or something. But yeah, it's really bizarre.
Yeah.
Do you think maybe it's like because you like if you're a fan of just the Marvel world in general, you're a fan of the characters, you can kind of keep that you can keep the context going in your head over those periods that you're waiting for it, as opposed to just reading it over a weekend or something like that?
Yeah, you know, that's a really good point, because I think when it comes to big 2 characters, there is like a shorthand from them just being alive, you know, them just being a character. You're like, the Hulk is going to be this, Batman is always going to be this, Superman's always going to be this. And if there are tweaks to that character, you're almost going to remember them even more because like it differs from the norm, right? I don't know, maybe Paul, you probably read a little bit more Elseworld stuff in the DC universe than I do, so I don't know, is that true to your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my comparison would be like, I'm always going to be reading a Batman comic. Like I'm always going to be reading the main Batman title. You know what I mean? Month to month. And, you know, things like Elseworlds or other like the miniseries I mentioned earlier, like, yeah, I probably would have been happy just reading Batman the Detective, that Tom Taylor and Andy Kubert series, as a standalone trade down the road. But I like buying Batman comics physically week to week, month to month. So it's just something I've always done without really thinking that much about it. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but that's the thing I thought of.
Yeah.
Like I'm always going to be reading. I'll dip in and out of Detective, or if there's other Batman series, but the main Batman title I've kind of like always been buying since I've been back reading comics for the past decade or so. So just it's like a constant in my mind. I might let issues pile up, but it's never going to be a huge backlog for me. It's something that's my wavelength. Like that's kind of what keeps me afloat is Batman comics, for better or worse. You know,
I mean, I'm the same way with X-Men comics.
Sure.
So like I get that.
Yeah, and I think again that's the idea of being in the right mood speaks a lot to that, because like I'm kind of always going to be in the mood to be reading Batman comics. You know what I mean? It's like a constant, for better or for worse. They don't change very much, even when creative teams change. You might have a few interesting ideas here or there, but it is like a constant sort of, you know, through line that you can be reading and be in tune with. When there's something that is a little bit more, I don't know, complex or something a little more emotionally engaging, it can be tough to kind of make the right amount of time for it, to give it the attention it deserves. You know, like
what's that like? You know, wanting to read your favorite comics every month, because X-Men throws me for the ringer every month.
That might speak more to the X-Men than anything else. So,
no, it doesn't, Paul.
Well, I think that there's, and the thing about X-Men and Batman for sure, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, Mike, about X-Men, is like because there's a couple of titles going, because there's a couple of Elseworlds or whatever, there's always something that, you know, if something doesn't quite go, like you lose interest in one arc, or you don't like the way an artist is doing X, Y, or Z, and there's always another book that you can kind of jump into or maybe pay more attention to, and then just come back to the other one when that creative team leaves or things change, or, you know, you read some reviews and it's like, oh, this story is really turned around, it's worth reading. Whereas something like I kind of fell off of reading Green Arrow monthlies a number of years ago, because it came up against a couple of creative teams I just really didn't like, and I was just like, well, like, this is the only game in town for Green Arrow for this character, and as soon as like it got through 3 or 4 arcs, 3 or 4 creative teams, that I was just like, this is not doing it for me. Like this is not good. Like, and I won't say which ones they were, but I was just like, yeah, I'm out. Like, and I haven't really picked that up again of reading it monthly. And that was one of the last ones that I was kind of reading monthly.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, like, yeah, to your point, the X-Men will always be coming out. Batman will always be coming out. There's always going to be something. If you don't like it now, you can always come back to. But like, the question is, it does come down to, is like, are you going to go back, to try to bring it back to our topic? Are you going to go back and reread all those now that they're all out? Maybe you can get them on Marvel Unlimited, or you can get them on Hoopla, where you don't have to necessarily like wait month to month to continue this story arc that you don't like, or this interpretation, or this artist that you don't care for. Yeah,
because there's still, everything is still piling up. So it's like, you know, you put it down, and then things spring up in its absence, and then it's like, oh, okay, you're going to go pick that one up again because somebody told you that it's good, or like, or you feel like it's essential to something that's coming up, or like, I don't know, if you're a completist or something like that. It's yeah, it's hard. It's hard being a comic fan, guys.
Yeah, I mean, comics are like the mail, man. They come every week, and you're just like, what's happening? Stop, slow down for a second, you know?
Yeah. And on top of that, I mean, you have, you know, whatever 70, 80 years worth of backlog in terms of historic characters. If you want to go back and be reading a bunch of old Batman comics or a bunch of old X-Men comics, that's all there too for you, like waiting, taunting you that you haven't read it yet. So I mean, I kind of,
and the independent stuff too. Like, I just recently read through the Ink Hall, because like,
oh yeah,
you have to read it, and it's like, oh man, like, this is a book from the 70s. Like, Jesus, I have so much to catch up on.
Yeah, I'm going to add that one to my queue. I forgot about that one. I still have to read
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking about that last summer when I was reading so much Judge Dredd last summer. I got almost burned out on it, but I was reading all the old collections from the 70s and 80s. And it's like, they're great if you just want to binge stuff. But after a while, it's like, I need to take a break. So now I think I'm back. I can go back and start Complete Case Files number 11. I think that's where I left off. So I can go back to my 80s Judge Dredd and see if it's still as great as I remember at this point. But I just need a little break, you know? to catch my breath.
That's a whole other side of this that I didn't even consider for today, was going back and reading, 40, 50, 60, 70 years worth of old comics. I mean, God help you if you want to go back and read those old Valiant comics from the 90s or Cyberforce or whatever Image was doing back in the day. But like, on top of that, Gabe, like you were saying, like the Call, like these independent comics that are like truly like monumental things that changed some comics in a capacity. There's a lot of that stuff that's out there if you wanted to be a quote unquote completionist in some way and just like say, I'm going to read everything from this decade. Like, good luck. Like, you're never going to be able to read a modern comic because you're going to be, backfilled with all this stuff on top of these greats like Sandman or Saga of Swamp Thing or The Call or Watchmen, V for Vendetta. I mean, you start to list a bunch of names. We're already talking like hundreds and hundreds of pages of comics. And then we're like, no, and then get into the nitty gritty of like all the X-Men books that were coming out, all the Spider-Man, all the Batman, all the DC,
absolutely.
Every Superman comic, like for just 3 years you could have multiple years worth of reading for you. So that's I will never do that. I'm just going to say that right here and now on the show. I will never be that person, because I started in 2000 and tried to do that, and it was like, no, that's not even possible. So
let the past die, kill it if you have to.
Exactly. There it is. And I think we kind of joked about it, but sometimes being a comic book fan can feel daunting, especially you're talking about legacy characters. It's like, do I really need to read all 45 years worth of Judge Dredd stories to enjoy current Judge Dredd stories? Like, no, but sometimes you feel that weight that you want to do it. You feel like it's almost like a challenge. Like, I tried to read a bunch of old X-Men stuff and, I kind of burned myself out, but sometimes that happens. And I feel it's easy to kind of feel like that pressure to want to do that, even though it's not necessary. You don't really need to read every Batman story to enjoy current ones. So
and
I think
some of because I have gone back and read some of the Silver Age Batman, and some of it is a slog. It's like, ooh, this is weird. He's fighting pirates in space, or like somebody is like, even like they have a lot of these now, like Polka Dot Man and Kite Man have all been kind of brought back up, and look how ridiculous they are. But like those are the ones that like made it. There's other ridiculous ones that there's no way you could possibly do this because it's so ridiculous.
Yeah. So I think if that's kind of your hang up, is feeling the pressure to read all the old stuff, you maybe don't have to. Maybe you can skip around a little bit and find the stuff you like. So
But I mean, from a positive side of it, from looking at it at a different lens, it's like it is one of the things where there's something out there for everybody. There's so much comic stuff out there. So when somebody says that they're or you're trying to encourage somebody to just get into comics, or maybe they liked it when they were younger and haven't returned back to it, like there's always something out there that can hook them. It's hard to find because it's just an ocean of content.
Sure.
But from a positive angle of it, if somebody says like, I'm not really into comics, it's like, well, really it's just you haven't found that one that is going to get you into it, because there is so much great stuff out there.
I had the experience recently of talking to somebody who doesn't read a lot of comics but has been watching the Doom Patrol series on HBO. And I said, well, guess what? There's tons of Doom Patrol comics and they're all pretty great. So that, there's a whole world to explore. And it kind of reminded me that I read, a handful of the old 60s Doom Patrol, but I never finished that run. So I'm inspired now to go back and finish all the 60s Doom Patrol, having read all the other stuff. So the overwhelmingness of comic books can be a positive, like you said, Gabe. Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to just make sure that you ended that conversation with, and then you can listen to the podcast that me and Mike recorded on Patreon, right? Like,
Mike and Paul read Doom Patrol. Yes.
Well, I guess to wrap up here, are there any books that you guys have? I realize we kind of got away from the backlog thing, but that's totally fine.
Yeah.
Are there any books that are on your backlog that you're like, you've recently hoisted to the top that you're like, I'm definitely reading this next? Like after, my weekly books or whatever books I'm regularly reading, like this is the series that I'm going to try to spend a little extra time on to just read it and say that I did it.
I have two actually. So having read Annihilator, I also remembered that I have the first 2 volumes of Zenith, which is the 2000 AD comic that Grant Morrison wrote back in the 80s. I have those on my bookshelf. They've been sitting there for years. And again, Grant Morrison's my favorite writer. So it's embarrassing that I haven't read their first published work for 2000 AD. But it's like, again, the thing where I want to make sure I'm in the right mind frame to really absorb it and appreciate it. It's probably not the polished Morrison that I like. It's their first work, so it might be a little rough. But I'm going to take that plunge. I'm going to start reading Zenith finally. And then sitting right next to my Zenith books is that giant fucking phone book collection of stray bullets that I bought years ago.
Did you buy a placard to read that as well? Like, Jesus.
I mean, I've read a few arcs of Stray Bullets over the years. I really like Dave Lapham as a creator. That is an iconic independently published book. If you're going to talk about, classic 80s or 90s black and white indies, Stray Bullets is right up there. So yeah, but the thing is that book is it looks like a phone book on my shelf, and it's just so daunting. I'm finally going to do it. I think I have to find a comfortable chair and table to put it on. I can't sit with it on my lap, but I'm going to have to find the right mind frame, setting for it to finally tackle that bad boy.
Awesome. Gabe, what about you? Any other books that you know that you've got off the top of your head that you want to hoist from your backlog?
Well, this podcast has reminded me about Die, so I'm definitely going to jump into that one.
Yes.
That one is done, right? Their series is done.
Yeah, the 4th volume just dropped, I want to say, a couple weeks back, so it's all done.
Okay, great. I'm definitely going to jump into that one. Gideon Falls, another one that I mentioned, has been done for a while that I want to jump into. I do love Jeff Lemire. White Ash, the one that I mentioned, I will continue reading. Something is killing the children, and until I don't think it's ending yet. I think it might be continuing for a while. So I'll keep reading it until it ends or until it gets bad. And then the other one that's been sitting on my shelf for a while is the Chip Zdarsky Daredevil run.
So good.
So I'm a big fan of Chip Zdarsky. I loved Sex Criminals. I loved it so much, and I'm a big Daredevil guy. I mean, something that I've certainly gotten into since the TV show has come out. Kind of a new fan of Daredevil, kind of in relation to a lot of other things. But I loved, like I said, I love Zdarsky. I actually really liked Bendis's take on Daredevil as a character. So I'm looking forward to jumping back into the character, and I've been meaning to do it for a while, and it's time to do it.
Gotcha. Well, I feel like some of the options that I have in my queue are promises to people that I feel like I'm still going to break, because like while they are higher in the queue, I may not get to them. But I'm definitely looking forward to reading. I'm finally, I think, going to sit down and read all of Deadly Class. I think it's going to happen. That's like, I think beginning of next year. Deadly Class is going to be my big one for the year. The other thing I'm looking forward to actually reading is Sithra, which is a Indiegogo / Kickstarter series. Like, it started on Indiegogo, moved to Kickstarter, and this is before Comicsgate by a long shot. So this isn't like me subtly admitting that I'm backing. It's been this guy Jason Brubaker, and he did like 6 or 7 volumes of this, and I read the first one. I was like, yeah, this is good, and then I just kept backing them like in physical hardcover editions. I have them all sitting on my shelf, and I haven't read anything beyond volume 1. So fingers crossed that it was good. But I mean, a lot of people help support it, so I think that's a good sign in my case. But looking forward to actually reading that. And then I do want to read this manga series that I bought all of the volumes of, and I read the first 4, and then I never continued. Again, this is by one of the people who was behind the series Yuri on Ice. If you've seen that anime series, it's a very cute, romantic, slightly sexy story about these ice skaters. It's a whole thing. So look up Yuri on Ice. It's pretty good. But they before they did that anime, they did this series called Again, about a kid who falls down some stairs and travels back in time in high school and gets to relive his high school in order to not be this brooding, awful character and actually maybe make something of himself that is not so negative and bad. But it's pretty cute, kind of funny. So I'm looking forward to reading that as well. Plus, there's like a shitload of other things. I think I listed like 12 books in here. So like my bookshelf and my digital collection is just overflowing. Like, and I've already tapped into things like Vinland Saga. I've been slowly reading. That book is still coming out, but man, probably one of the coolest, most action-packed manga you can read that doesn't feel like your typical shonen book. It's really, really good. But yeah, I could go on. But yeah, lots of stuff to read this year. And Deadly Class is the only one that our friend Simon listens to the show. I'm going to break his heart if I don't actually fall through on this one. So I definitely need to get to it eventually and get over my misaligned beef with Rick Remender that I apparently have in my head. So yeah, Gabe, Paul, thank you guys for doing this episode with me. This was a lot of fun. hopefully this is encourages all of us to read a lot more backlog comics and not just get, stick to our weeklies, as I think a lot of us are want to do. So I look forward to hearing from both of you about what you've picked up from your backlog, whether we followed through on our promises today or not. Regardless, I respect both of you.
Thanks.
So I guess to wrap things up, Gabe, where can people find you on the internet if they want to hear more about what other comics you've been reading, the other stuff you've got going on, and the comics you're going to be putting out starting next year?
You can go to GabeChengComics.com, which is where you can see previews of the comics that I have out, and I'll be putting up a preview of my next comic up there pretty soon. But the first chapter of my comic For Molly is up there for free. You can check it out. And the other issues, the other remaining 3 issues, are going to be available online. I'm about to do the fulfillment on the 4th issue, so that will be available. The Kickstarter fulfillment in the next couple of weeks, like I said. So. That will be available online pretty soon. And that is my first complete story comic book 4-part limited series. So thank you very much. I'm very excited. And you can also follow me on Instagram at Gabe Cheng Comics, same on Twitter at Gabe Cheng Comics. And my podcast, Another Lousy Millennium, which is a Futurama fan podcast, which, Mike, I believe you were on for an episode, correct?
Yes, I was.
We did a crossover a while ago. That podcast is coming to an end because we have gone through every episode of Futurama and all 4 movies.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. But it's evergreen content, of course, because the show is not changing. My opinions have changed very little in the last 20 years about it. So go back and listen to those if you're a Futurama fan. That's almpod.com or Another Lousy Millennium, wherever fine podcasts are downloaded.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure all those links are in the show notes. I guess for me and Paul, next week's show, I should say, before we wrap up here, Brian and Kate and I are going to be talking about our Goodreads reading challenge picks that we did. I know we keep plugging it, but we really want you all to just read this incredible list of comics. So Brian, Kate, and I are going to be talking about the books that we picked and some of our thoughts on the books that we've read from that list. And yeah, until then, you can follow me or you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow Paul at Oh Hi Paulie. You can follow me at Mike Rappin. You can follow the show on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at IRCB Podcast.
This episode first aired on Patreon is possible because of our wonderful patrons. You can join today for exclusive series like the IRCB Movie Club, Mike and Paul read Doom Patrol, the Saga of Saga, and much more. Join now at patreon.com/IRCB podcast. And if you haven't already, please take a minute to rate and review the show. I think 5 stars is a fair rating. You can do that on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps us out and spreads the word about the show.
You can join the IRCB Discord community to chat comics and so much more. Listen to our episodes live like our good friend Danny is today. You can check the link for that in the show notes. You join, come hang out with us. It's a bunch of cool people that, we do hangouts and all sorts of other fun things, and a special book club. It would help us a lot also if you could tell your friends, your local comic shop, your mom, your grandma, your cousin about the show. It just really helps. Word of mouth is the best way to spread the love for any podcast that you listen to. Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music. We can't thank them enough. Xander is a very cool guy who makes us sound extremely cool every week. He edits the show. We can't thank them enough. And I want to say thank you to Gabe again and Paul for being on the show. Thank you to everyone listening. Thank you to everyone who supports us on Patreon. Thank you to Danny who's hanging out with us live. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.